So today we're holding a press conference in advance of the joint agency workshop that will be held at 4 o'clock today, sponsored by the California Energy Commission. And that is going to explore extending the operation life of Diablo Canyon beyond the term of its existing license, which is in 2025, 2024 for the Unit 1 and 2025 for the Unit 2 reactor. And basically, we feel this is a futile trip down a dead-end road, right? The meeting is really unnecessary and it's futile, and our speakers are going to tell you why. So today we have Dan Hirsch, who's president of the Committee to Bridge the Gap, and a retired director of a program, the Environmental Nuclear Policy Program at UC Santa Cruz. And Ralph Cavanagh is the Energy Program Director at NRDC. And we have Frank Lindh, who was the former General Counsel at the CPUC and was very instrumental. He was counsel to Friends of the Earth and the NRDC in the Diablo Canyon retirement agreement negotiations. He is a lecturer of law at Stanford Law School and a practicing lawyer. And we also have from Mothers for Peace, Carole Hisasue, and she will talk about and give her personal story. And she lives in not far, 7 miles from Diablo Canyon. So we have lots of different perspectives today. I'm going to pass it on to Dan, who's going to kick it off and give us some background on the seismic landscape that Diablo is living in.
So the Diablo Canyon reactors each contain about 1,000 times the long-lived radioactivity of the Hiroshima bomb, and they only stay inside those reactors so long as the system is working, so long as there is cooling. Among the major risks to that would be an earthquake. When PG&E was first putting forward the plan for Diablo Canyon, they claimed that there were no active earthquake faults within 30 kilometers, and they built the plant accordingly. However, shortly after the construction permit was granted, the Hisasue fault was discovered, which comes within 4 kilometers of the reactors and can produce an earthquake far larger than the plant was designed for. Rather than fix this problem, PG&E got an exemption from their design basis earthquake. They said, however, there wouldn't be any more earthquake faults found. But then the San Luis Bay fault was discovered, active near Diablo, and the Los Osos fault was discovered, also active near the reactors. And then to make matters much, much worse, in 2007, the shoreline fault was discovered coming within 600 meters of the reactors. These faults were capable of much larger ground shaking than the plant had been originally designed for. The PG&E then claimed not to worry, that the faults weren't connected. If they were connected, you have an even larger problem because that can produce larger shaking. They now have had to admit that the Hisasue and the shoreline faults are connected. They claim that the Hisasue and San Simeon faults weren't connected, but now admit that the Hisasue, San Simeon, and San Gregorio faults are connected. So they now admit that there could be a joint rupture along the Hisasue, San Simeon, San Gregorio fault zone, which runs from south of the reactors to north of San Francisco, making a massive quake possible, none of which was contemplated when the plant was designed. So instead of no active faults within 30 kilometers and no interactions, we now know that there are 4 nearby faults and several interconnections. As you have just heard, the governor is about to try to ram through legislation in the last days of session to breach the Diablo Canyon phase-out agreement he previously boasted of having brokered. It would exempt the most dangerous technology on Earth from essentially all California environmental laws. I would respectfully ask the governor, what will you tell the people of California if your actions succeed in keeping that aged reactor running longer than you promised, resulting in a catastrophic meltdown from an earthquake on one of those faults that weren't supposed to be there, or from the reactor's decrepit condition, resulting in a massive release of radioactivity over large parts of the state?
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to pass it on to Ralph, and Ralph Cavanagh, please enlighten us on the renewable situation and other things. Thank you.
Well, for all in the audience, I've been at NRDC since 1979, and I was one of the many who participated in creating the agreement to retire and replace Diablo Canyon in 2016. Frank Lindh was also involved. He'll focus on that, although I'm happy to answer questions about it. I'm going to provide some additional detail on what Dan mentioned at the end of his remarks, which is the text that's circulating of a bill to extend the lifetime of Diablo Canyon. Now, the text says that the intent is to extend it by 5 to 10 years, but the bill does not require plant retirement before November of 2035. We all think that legislators should reject it out of hand. As Dan mentioned, the bill includes sweeping exemptions from the California Environmental Quality Act and California's once-through cooling requirements for power plants. It even attempts to amend or to lift compliance requirements with the federal Coastal Zone Management Act, which is a real stretch for a California state statute. Our permitting agencies would be forced to act on license extension applications within 180 days and would have to, quote, prioritize, end quote, findings that the plant is, quote, critical, end quote, to maintaining reliable electricity service. The state of California would loan PG&E up to $1.4 billion to cover costs of extending Diablo Canyon's operating life, with all of the loan potentially, quote, forgivable, end quote. And the state would pay PG&E $7 for every megawatt hour of power generated prior to the start of extended operations of the plant in 2025. Now, Diablo Canyon's annual generation averages more than 17 million megawatt hours. So that subsidy would exceed $120 million a year. The bill includes no reference to the settlement agreement governing the plant's retirement in 2025. And that agreement also made extensive provision for retirement of the plant with clean energy resources. And for 6 years, all of the parties to that agreement have been acting in good faith to realize its goals. No mention in the statute, and by the way, no mention in the background that was provided in advance of today's workshop by the California Energy Commission. Nor does the bill so much as mention accelerated energy efficiency or demand response measures as a potential response to reliability challenges, suggesting it wasn't written by anyone with any understanding of California's energy policy or its history. The findings used to justify these extraordinary provisions include no citations to published studies by any California regulator or agency that recommend a further life extension for Diablo Canyon, and there are no such studies. Ileana, back to you.
Thank you so much. Frank, if you could elaborate on that, that would be great, and kind of dig into the agreement and what it means legally. Thank you so much. And Frank is on a phone.
And thank you. And do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I wanted to offer a few comments about this landmark agreement in 2016. PG&E and the environmental community, as well as labor and community organizations, entered into this agreement to retire Diablo Canyon in 2024-25, and then to use this period now to acquire and build sufficient replacement resources, including energy efficiency, but also clean energy sources, to replace Diablo Canyon, so that when it does retire in 2024 and 2025, there will be no increase in greenhouse gas emissions. That's a binding legal contract between PG&E and those parties, and it was approved in full by the state. Then Lieutenant Governor Newsom approved it, the Public Utilities Commission approved it, the legislature and Governor Brown approved it. And we've been working in good faith, as Ralph said, since 2016, or especially since 2018 when it was approved, to go forward with that plan of replacing Diablo. So our point today is that the governor should not change the course, but should stay the course. He should not change the course. He should stay the course. The 2016 agreement is in full effect. It's working as intended. We're making good progress towards the replacement of Diablo Canyon, and there is no reason for California to consider extending the operating licenses of the Diablo Canyon power plant beyond 2025. I can also add, if I may please, that we think the governor's action, if he were to do this, would be illegal under the U.S. Constitution. The Contracts Clause of the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, provides that no state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts. And that's exactly what this would be. It would be impairing the obligations under the joint proposal, which is a binding contract. So we think the governor's proposal is ill-advised, unnecessary, and illegal under the United States Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That's, I think, an important point that hopefully the governor's office will hear. I am going to pass it now to Carole Hisasue, who is really going to give some sort of personal and local flavor as to what this means, what extending the life of Diablo Canyon means for her personally and for her community in San Luis Obispo, just miles away from the reactor. Carole.
Thank you. I feel completely betrayed by what the governor has been working on the last several months. When I first heard about the joint agreement to shut down Diablo Canyon at the end of the current licenses, I proudly told my Japanese friends how California had wised up and we were putting the last century finally behind us and moving into a nuclear-free future. Well, they quickly deflated my optimism. They said, the shutdown's not happening for another 8-9 years and anything can happen. Well, before Fukushima, we scoffed at anything like Chernobyl happening in Japan. We'd been operating nuclear plants for decades without incident, and we're the nation whose high-speed trains run on time, nearly to the second. Our engineers, our work staff, they're conscientious, dedicated to a fault. But now we know that none of that mattered because things happen. So every day I look south and pray that nothing happens at Diablo Canyon, 7 miles from my home. Every day, in the back of my mind, it's looming there like the sword of Damocles. And then you have to take into consideration the aspect of probability. The more times you go skydiving, the greater the odds are that the next dive, something's going to happen. The more times you eat oysters, the greater the likelihood that the next one is going to give you food poisoning. The longer a nuclear power plant stays in operation, the greater the risk of an accident, equipment failure, or terrorist attack causing a release of radiation. Just the way those things work. Except with a nuclear power plant, the consequences are catastrophic. Nuclear generation is the most dangerous, expensive, complicated way to boil water to generate electricity. And to make matters worse, Diablo is decades old, with reactor embrittlement issues, deferred maintenance, mechanical problems with the stator and auxiliary water feeding systems. Veteran workers have moved on, and the plant is sited over connecting fault lines. The odds are really, really, really stacked up against us. Millions of people's lives and livelihoods are at stake. Why would Governor Newsom want to take this kind of gamble with his political career? If something were to happen at Diablo, not only is he putting his political future at risk, he'd be putting all of us at tremendous risk. There's no need to do so. California is already on the right track, expanding renewables, storage, and efficiency, and we should continue to do so. So please, Governor Newsom, don't take us back to 1960s technology to deal with today's challenges. Do not betray this community, and do not betray California's unique position as a leader in innovation and forward thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Carole. That was great. So I think, we've gotten a good perspective from different angles on the current situation with Diablo. And obviously, everyone here is not in favor of extending the operating license. So I want to open it up to questions. If any of the reporters here have questions, you can unmute yourselves or raise your hand and I can call on you. And we're happy to engage you. It's a great opportunity because there's only a couple of you and you've got some real experts on hand here. Are there any questions? Maybe not.
Yeah, I had a question.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, give me one moment to. Carole, can you talk a little bit about your history? I understand you moved here from Japan and then to Los Osos. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I lived in Tokyo for most of my adult life and then moved here to Los Osos in 2006. When I did, of course, I knew that there was a nuclear power plant very close by, but that was before Fukushima. And I was probably just as cavalier as a lot of these people who were saying, we need to keep Diablo Canyon open to, supply electricity for the state. I just didn't, the possibility of a major accident was not as real for me then. But after 2011, when I saw what happened to Japan and Fukushima is very much like San Luis Obispo County in terms of size and their economy. They rely very much on tourism, agriculture, and the fisheries. So I just saw too many similarities and what might happen here too. Now, oftentimes people, the supporters of the people who want Diablo Canyon to continue say, well, what took out Fukushima was the tsunami. This Diablo Canyon is sited much higher. A tsunami will never wipe out their backup electricity. But like what Dan was just saying, it's sited over all these connecting fault lines. There could be a situation when an earthquake comes and the whole half of that cliff just slides right into the ocean. And that's what I'm trying to tell people is that anything can happen. We just aren't imagining all the different possibilities. And even if we are, we're not taking them seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions? Well, I think what we can wrap up, I am going to send this around because we have a recording, so I will include that in the release, but I really appreciate all of you attending. And if there are any other comments, please go ahead in our last few minutes. Okay, and otherwise, I think all of us will be attending the workshop this afternoon, starting at 4 p.m., which should be an interesting event.